$38 trillion in debt sounds like the kind of number you make up in a joke. That's not a joke. That's where the U.S. national debt has actually landed as of late 2025. If a regular person owed that much relative to their income, the bank would take away their cards, their house, and probably the pen they used to sign the loan. But governments play by different rules. They don't have to pay debt back the way you and I do. They can let time, inflation, interest rates, and policy do a lot of the heavy lifting. That's what this whole quiet erasing of $38 trillion really is. Not some magic payoff, but a set of mechanisms that slowly shrink the real burden of that debt while pushing a good chunk of the cost onto workers, savers, and the middle class. Let's break that down in plain language. Wait, $38 trillion of what exactly? The national debt is basically the running tab the federal government has built up over time. Every year it spends more than it collects in taxes. The difference gets added to this pile. As of late 2025, that pile is around $38 trillion, and it's now larger than the entire U.S. economy for the year. Debt to GDP, debt as a percentage of the economy, is hovering around 120% plus. That's not we're a little over budget. That's we're carrying more IOUs than we produce in a year. If you or I got into that situation, there would be a very simple ending: bankruptcy, foreclosure, collections, or all three. For a government? Different game, different tools. Governments rarely pay off debt. They manage it. Households think in terms of, I borrowed $10,000, I must pay back $10,000 plus interest. Governments think in terms of, we borrowed a ton, we'll roll it over, issue new bonds, let inflation chip away at it, grow the economy, adjust taxes, and hope no one panics. The key idea: they don't need the number to go to zero. They just need the burden of that number to shrink relative to the size of the economy, tax base, and the value of money itself. That's where the quiet part comes in. There are a few main tools they lean on. Tool number 1, inflation, the silent debt eraser. Inflation is the rate at which prices rise and the value of money falls. Everyone feels it at the grocery store and the gas pump. But there's another side to it. When a government borrows money today, it borrows in today's dollars. When it pays that money back decades later, it pays in future dollars that are weaker. If prices double over time, then a fixed $1,000 debt is much smaller in real terms. The number on paper is the same, but what that number can buy has shrunk. That shrinkage is a kind of quiet discount on old debt. Economists sometimes call this an inflation tax, a hidden tax that transfers wealth from savers, whose money is being eroded, to debtors, whose debts are getting easier to carry. Governments, as the biggest debtor in the room, tend to benefit from this dynamic. So when inflation spikes for a few years, it's painful for households, but it helps reduce the real value of long-term government debt. Groceries up, rent up health insurance, up government, old debt now cheaper in real terms, nice for them, less nice for your wallet. Tool number 2, negative real interest rates. When saving loses by design. Real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus inflation. If your savings account pays 3%, but inflation is 6%, your real return is negative 3%. Your money is slowly losing purchasing power even though the balance is creeping up. This is not a bug in the system. This is a feature. When real interest rates are low or negative, governments can borrow at cheap rates. The real burden of existing debt gets chipped away over time. Savers and bondholders quietly lose. Historically, this isn't new. After World War II, countries like the US and UK used a mix of inflation and below-inflation interest rates to reduce very high debt to GDP levels over time. In simple terms, your savings account is doing light jogging. Inflation is running sprints. Government debt is sitting in the shade, letting the gap between the two quietly work in its favor. Tool number 3, financial repression, making your money. Help whether you like it or not. Financial repression sounds dramatic, but the mechanics are pretty dry. policies that channel private savings into government debt and keep interest rates artificially low. This can include things like regulations that encourage or require banks, pensions, and financial institutions to hold lots of government bonds, capital rules that label government debt as the safest asset, nudging big pools of money into buying it, policies or norms that keep interest rates on government debt lower than they probably would be in a fully free market. The result? The government has a captive audience for its debt. Investors and savers earn relatively low returns, especially after inflation. Over time, the real value of the government's debt shrinks. You might think, I'm just saving for retirement, or I just want a safe fund. But under the hood, your savings can be one of the pipes feeding this system, because big chunks of retirement funds and institutional money sit in government bonds by design. You're not being personally targeted. You're just in the demographic labeled reliable source of funds. Tool number 4, taxes collect later after the applause. Debt is future money spent today. At some point, someone has to deal with it. That someone is usually future taxpayers. Policy can raise tax rates outright. Let bracket creep do the work. If tax brackets don't keep up fully with inflation, more of your income quietly gets taxed at higher rates. Introduce temporary taxes or surcharges that sometimes stick around longer than the marketing suggested. Add it up and you get this cycle. Borrow now to fund programs, benefits, or emergencies. Enjoy the political win. Slowly collect the tab over time through higher or more broadly applied taxes. This doesn't erase the debt overnight, but it's another way the burden gets spread across the population rather than landing purely on whoever issued the debt in the first place. Tool number 5, soft default, keeping the promise. Technically, when people hear default, they think of a government saying, "We're not paying our bonds back." That's a hard default, and it's rare for a country with its own currency. More common is a kind of soft default. Benefits, pensions, and social programs technically still get paid, but they don't grow as fast as inflation for long periods, or eligibility rules change. You receive the nominal amount you were promised, but its buying power is weaker than expected. On paper, no promise has been broken. In reality, the value of the promise has been reduced. Think of someone saying, "I'll pay you back $1,000 in 30 years. 30 years later, they do write that check. But if the cost of living has tripled, that $1,000 doesn't mean what you thought it would. This is one more way debt gets handled quietly, by letting real obligations to citizens erode without an official "we defaulted" headline. Tool number 6, asset price inflation, making people feel rich while they're being diluted. Another part of this story is asset price inflation, when stocks, real estate, and other assets rise in price. Houses go up in value, stock portfolios grow. People look at their net worth and think, "I'm doing okay." At the same time, entry prices for those assets are higher. Rents, down payments, and basic living costs climb with them. Younger or lower-income households find it harder to buy in. This creates a wealth effect. People who own assets feel richer and may spend more, which is good for the economy and tax revenue. It also makes balance sheets, including the government's, look healthier relative to the debt. But if the rise in asset prices is partly driven by low rates, money printing, or a debt-fueled stimulus, then some of that wealth is really just a reflection of a more stretched system. On paper, it looks like everyone's up. In practice, the cost of everything important, homes, education, retirement, is further out of reach. That's great if you're already well invested. Much less great if you're just trying to get started. So who wins and who loses in this quiet erasure? Let's boil it down. Tends to benefit the government by having its old debt gradually shrink in real terms. Big borrowers with assets that move with inflation, businesses, real estate owners. Those closely plugged into the financial system who can adjust faster and access better opportunities. Tends to lose savers sitting in lots of cash or low-yield safe accounts. retirees on fixed incomes whose benefits don't fully keep up with inflation, wage earners whose pay rises slower than prices, younger people trying to buy into housing and assets after prices have inflated. This is the uncomfortable truth. A big chunk of reducing the real impact of $38 trillion in debt happens by spreading that cost across the population, mostly via inflation, low real returns on savings, and higher long-term tax burdens. No villain monologue, no official announcement. Just a system that, over time, shifts the pain away from the issuer of the debt and toward everyone living inside the currency. So what can regular people actually do? You don't control inflation policy. You don't set interest rates. You don't decide how much your government borrows, but you're not powerless. Here are principles that make sense in a world where debt is being managed this way. 1. Think in real, not just nominal, terms. Don't just ask, how much money do I have? Ask, what can it buy now and 10 to 20 years from now? That mindset alone changes how you see inflation, wages, and safe accounts. 2. Respect cash. But don't over-worship it. Cash is essential for emergencies, flexibility sleeping at night. But as a long-term investment, large idle cash piles are basically volunteering to be slowly taxed by inflation. You want enough cash to be safe, not so much that you're getting quietly drained. 3. Own things that fight back against inflation. Over the long run, people tend to use productive skills and careers, higher earning power, businesses or side hustles, investments in assets like diversified stocks, real estate, or other real financial assets. Nothing is risk-free, but historically, owning assets that can grow faster than inflation has been one of the few ways to avoid being on the losing end of financial repression. 4. Be very careful with high-interest debt. In a world where inflation and low real rates help government debt, high-interest personal debt does the opposite to you. It makes you the one being squeezed. Credit cards, personal loans, buy now, pay later, auto loans with painful rates. These make you fragile. Paying them down is one of the fastest ways to improve your own balance sheet in a system that's not really designed for your comfort. 5. Don't rely on one pillar. Only if all your future depends on one job, one pension, one government program, one source of income, then you're heavily exposed to any policy, crisis, or shift that affects that one pillar. Multiple skills, multiple ways to earn, and a mix of assets make you harder to knock over when the big players start adjusting dials to fix their own problems. The bottom line: erasing $38 trillion in debt doesn't mean someone is cutting a check. It means letting inflation reduce the real value of old obligations, keeping interest rates, especially real rates, low enough that debt is manageable, steering savings into government debt through policy and regulation, using taxes and slow-moving policy changes to spread the cost, managing perceptions so people don't revolt at the word default, even as their purchasing power gets trimmed. It's not a secret master plan in a hidden bunker. It's a collection of tools economists have written about for decades, and they're being used again because the alternative, hard default or brutal cuts, is politically explosive. For you, the key is not to sit there as a passive input into that system. The more you understand how the game works, the more you can protect your savings from stealth erosion, build earning power that adjusts with reality, own assets instead of just holding cash, make decisions based on real value, not just big scary numbers on screens. You didn't create that $38 trillion tab, but you are living in the world where it has to be managed. The goal isn't to panic. The goal is to stop being surprised and start positioning yourself so that when debt gets quietly erased, your future isn't erased with it. Thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. We just unpacked how that giant headline number isn't some abstract problem out there, but a system that quietly shifts the weight of trillions through inflation, low real interest rates, financial repression, sneaky tax moves, and slow erosion of real benefits. In simple terms, the debt gets lighter for the people who created it by getting heavier for savers, workers, and the middle class. The point wasn't to scare you, it was to hand you the playbook. When you understand how the game is played, you can stop being the one who pays for it blindly and start protecting yourself with better skills, smarter saving, and assets that actually fight back. If this helped you see money and policy a little differently, do 3 quick things for me. Like this video so it reaches more people. Subscribe to Virtual Finance Navigator so you don't miss the next breakdown. Comment one thing you're going to change after watching. And share this with someone who still thinks the debt problem is not their issue. Their future self might thank you.